The year was 1839, and the air inside the Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg felt electric with curiosity. Dr. Joseph Hamel, a reserved Russian chemist with sunken eyes and a mind forever lost in thought, stood before an audience of scholars. He held up a fragile photographic plate, its silver haloid surface shimmering faintly under the gaslight. "This," he began, voice trembling slightly with both fear and wonder, "is no ordinary image. The halogenide silver captures more than light. It captures what ancient civilizations once called the soul." The audience stirred uneasily. Whispers rippled through the hall, some amused, others fearful. But Hamel continued, lifting a lantern toward the plate. The shadow of his hand danced across the wall behind him. "When a photograph is taken," he said, "light records not only reflection, but essence. It preserves something we cannot see, but which is nonetheless alive." One man in the crowd scoffed. "You're suggesting a camera can steal sauce?" Dr. Hamel smiled faintly. "Not steal, only trap their echo." His assistant, Antalibadeb, watched from the side, his brow furrowed. The room, heavy with tension, smelled of chemicals and old varnish. Hamel's hands trembled as he placed the photo plate into a wooden case lined with black velvet. He knew what he'd discovered and what it might cost him. Later that evening, the corridors of the academy were silent. A storm rattled the tall windows as Hamel returned alone to his laboratory. Shelves lined with jars and glass tubes flickered under dim candlelight. Anton's footsteps echoed behind him. "You should rest, doctor," he said softly. Hamel shook his head. "No, Anton. Tonight, we prove it." He uncovered a new plate and positioned it before an old portrait of his late wife, a painting that had long since lost its color. He adjusted the exposure, heart pounding as the light began to burn onto the silver surface. When the process finished, he held the plate up and froze. The faint outline of a woman's face shimmered in the negative, her eyes open and hauntingly real. But this was not paint. It was her. Her expression flickered. Sorrow, then rage, then nothing. The glass cracked in his hands. Anton recoiled. "My God. What is that?" Hamel whispered. "She remembers." Moments later, the lanterns in the room dimmed, the air thick with static. From somewhere deep within the shadows came the sound of a woman's faint, broken sob. By morning, Hamel's laboratory was found abandoned. The door had been bolted from the inside, the windows shattered outward. Only a trail of silver dust led to a single photo plate still resting on the table. When Anton lifted it, the image revealed Hamel's distorted face, mouth open in a silent scream, and behind him a blurred silhouette of a woman's hand resting on his shoulder. The Academy dismissed the incident as an accident. Chemical fumes, they claimed, but the rumor spread quickly. The doctor had tried to photograph a ghost, and the ghost had looked back. That night, in a different part of the city, a young archivist named Eleanor Grace received a sealed crate from the Academy, labeled property of Dr. Hamel. Confiscated materials. She opened it carefully under the flicker of her desk lamp. Inside were several photo plates, each one blackened except for faint shapes, human outlines, faces mid-scream, hands pressed against invisible walls. One note rested on top. In Hamel's handwriting, "The soul does not vanish. It lingers in the light." Eleanor felt the room grow colder. Outside, thunder rolled again. She brushed her fingers over the glass surface, and in that instant, saw her reflection blink. The night had stretched far beyond Eleanor's patience. The storm outside had not ceased. Lightning flickered against the tall windows of the Imperial Archive, bathing the shelves of parchment and ancient books in ghostly white. The crate sat before her like something alive. Its contents felt heavier than mere glass and paper. She leaned closer to one of Hamel's surviving plates. The faint outline of his face seemed to pulse. When the lantern flame wavered, she told herself it was just the trick of light, yet her reflection beside his appeared misaligned, as if time itself lagged between the two. A colleague, Michel Ott, entered quietly, holding a cup of coffee. "You're still here?" he asked. Eleanor didn't look up. "I can't stop thinking about this man." He believed the camera could trap the soul. What if he was right? Mitchell smirked. Or what if he just inhaled too many fumes from his experiments? But his voice faltered as he noticed the strange shimmer on the plate. Eleanor turned to him. "Look closer." He hesitated, then leaned in. For a moment, nothing moved, until the faint outline of a woman's face, half-formed, rippled across the glass like disturbed water. Mitchell stumbled backward, spilling his drink. "What the hell?" "That's impossible," Eleanor whispered, almost to herself. Hemmel called them soul shadows, echoes of life preserved by light. They decided to secure the plates inside the archives vault before morning, but sleep never came easy that night. Eleanor dreamed of standing in Hammel's laboratory, the air cold and metallic. The woman from the photograph stood beside her, eyes hollow, lips moving in silence. Then, in a sudden flash of light, the walls around them melted into photographs. Thousands of faces staring, trapped, screaming. She woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. The clock struck 3:17 a.m. The sound of glass clinking came from the table. The photo plates she had sealed in their box were now spread across the floor, as though something had arranged them in a circle. In the center, a single photograph had developed overnight. It showed Eleanor herself, sitting exactly as she was now, head turned toward the camera, eyes wide in terror. The next morning, Mitchell found her pacing the archive floor. "Eleanor, what happened here?" She pointed at the photograph, trembling. Someone or something took this while I was asleep." Mitchell inspected it under the light. "There's no camera in this room." "Exactly," she whispered. "It took itself." He glanced around uneasily. "You're not saying that she's trying to come through?" Eleanor interrupted. Her tone was flat, haunted. "Hammel's wife!" "The soul he captured. It's looking for another vessel." Mitchell frowned. "You need rest." But before he could finish, the lantern on the wall flickered violently. A cold wind brushed across their skin, though every window was shut tight. From the far end of the room, one of the plates began to hum. The sound was soft at first, then grew into a shrill, metallic ringing. The glass vibrated until it shattered, scattering slivers across the floor. When the noise finally stopped, the room fell into silence. Mitchell crouched down, hand trembling as he picked up one shard. Etched within it, faint but unmistakable, was his own reflection. Except the face staring back wasn't his. It smiled, distorted, like something wearing his features as a mask. He dropped the glass instantly. They agreed to move the materials to Hammel's original laboratory, now sealed for decades on the edge of the city. "Maybe the answers are still there," Eleanor said. Mitchell hesitated, looking once more at the cracked photograph on the table. "Or maybe we're walking straight into what killed him." Still, by evening, they found themselves standing before the weathered doors of the old Hammel Institute. The building's windows were boarded, ivy crawling up its crumbling facade. The sign above the entrance had faded to near invisibility. Inside, the air was thick with decay. Dust hung like fog, and each step echoed like a heartbeat. Eleanor carried the crate of plates. Mitchell held the lantern. They reached the main laboratory, the one Hammel had used the night he disappeared. The faint outline of his chalk diagrams still lingered on the blackboard, covered in spiderwebs. Eleanor placed the plates carefully on the war table. "This is where it started," she said. Mitchell adjusted the light, and maybe where it should end. But when the lantern's beam swept across the far wall, they froze. There, beneath a torn cloth, hung an enormous mirror, cracked but intact. Across its surface were streaks of silver nitrate, old photographic residue. Eleanor whispered. "He wasn't just capturing them, he was trying to release them." Before Mitchell could answer, the temperature dropped. Their breath turned to mist. The mirror began to tremble. From the depths of the glass, faint figures began to form, faces pressing outward, as though drowning behind its surface. The sound of whispering filled the air, hundreds of overlapping voices, desperate, pleading. Eleanor's heart pounded. Hammel's souls. They're still here. Mitchell backed away, eyes wide. Then we leave. Now. But as he turned, the door slammed shut with violent force. The lantern flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the room, and from the mirror came the faintest sound, a woman's laugh. Soft, broken, familiar. Eleanor whispered, "She found us." The courtroom was silent, but for the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Mitchell stood frozen after Ruth's last words, his voice barely steady as he asked, "What happened after Thomas agreed to go with you?" Ruth's eyes never left the wooden floor as she began to speak. Her tone was calm to calm a steady, hollow echo of truth, stripped of all emotion. She said they had led Thomas along the mountain paths only the guardians knew, winding trails hidden beneath the moss and stone of Pinnacle Mountain. The journey took hours, but Thomas followed, fascinated, jotting notes in his small notebook. He had no idea he was walking into the heart of the mountain's oldest secret. When they reached the cavern entrance, the air grew cold and wet. Ruth described how they guided him through the twisting darkness chambers filled with glittering formations that had taken millennia to grow. Thomas was awestruck, asking questions about the geology, the history, the ancient silence that seemed to breathe around them. But when they crossed the underground river and stepped into the final chamber, the one holding the stone altar and the arranged remains, his fascination turned to horror. She said his face changed instantly. He dropped his notebook. He ran. But no one escaped the mountain. The tunnels were a labyrinth, known only to the guardians. In the near-total darkness, Thomas became lost within minutes. Ruth and Ruby followed slowly, without worry, with the patience of those who knew every curve and dead end. When they finally cornered him in a narrow passage, she said softly, it was there that the pact was fulfilled. Her voice remained calm, detached, yet it froze the courtroom. She did not describe the violence, nor the moment itself, only that it was swift, and Thomas did not suffer. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then the entire room erupted gasps, murmurs, the scrape of chairs. Judge Blackwood slammed his gavel, demanding silence. Mitchell's composure cracked, but he pressed on. Why him? Why Thomas? Ruth's reply was almost a whisper. Because the mountain chose him. We only listened. She explained that some souls vibrated with a resonance that called to the earth itself. People who didn't fully belong to the surface world. It wasn't hatred, she said. It was purpose. The guardians merely helped them find where they truly belonged. Mitchell continued listing names, Marcus Patan and the others. Ruth confirmed each one with chilling reverence, describing them not as victims, but as pilgrims who had unknowingly completed a sacred passage. When she finished, the room seemed drained of oxygen. Even Michel, USUA, LLY, relentless, slumped back, exhausted. Then the defense took over. Charles Donovan, pale and visibly shaken, tried to reason with the impossible. He asked Ruth if she'd been indoctrinated since childhood, if she truly believed her acts were divine duty. She answered plainly, yes, but belief, she said, did not cloud her understanding of the law. She knew the world saw her deeds as murder, yet she obeyed an older law, one written in stone and shadow, not ink. When Donovan asked if she felt remorse, Ruth finally lifted her gaze to the jury. There was a glimmer there, sadness, maybe grief, but not guilt. I feel sorrow for the necessity, she said, but not regret. The mountain called, and I answered. Then came Ruby's testimony. Her voice was identical to Ruth's, her words an echo that blurred the line between two souls. She confirmed everything, speaking with the same serenity, the same detachment. When asked if she felt emotion, she said quietly, human feelings fade where eternal duties begin. The courtroom felt like a place outside time. Their confessions were absolute, no denial, no fear. Judge Blackwood instructed the jury carefully on sanity, responsibility, and the limits of religious belief as a defense. It took less than 4 hours for them to return. When the foreman, a weary farmer, stood and declared guilty on all 5 counts of murder, the air broke into a storm of sound, half applause, half despair. Ruth and Ruby sat still, hands clasped, staring toward the window where the Appalachian Mountains loomed gray under the November sky. Sentencing was delayed 1 week, And during that week, something strange began. Across the mountain communities, animals grew restless. Birds circled without direction. Villagers reported dreams of voices whispering from deep within the stone. Some said the mountains themselves were mourning. Sheriff William Hargrove dismissed it as hysteria. But Edmund Price, who'd lived his whole life among those peaks, felt something heavier in the wind. He tried to warn the sheriff the night before sentencing. William only shook his head. "The law stands above superstition," he said. But Edmund's eyes told another story. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. Judge Blackwood entered with a face carved from sorrow. He spoke of justice, of civilization, of how human law must stand, even against the oldest beliefs. His voice cracked, once barely noticeable. "When Asa eat, sincerity of faith does not absolve one of blood." Then he pronounced the sentence. Death by hanging. Execution, dated December 15th, 1933. Ruth and Ruby finally reacted. They turned to each other, embraced tightly, and for the first time since their arrest, they cried. Silent tears, identical faces streaked with grief, not for themselves, but for what must end with them. Hargrove led them from the room, and for the first time, pity settled into his chest like a weight he could not shake. They would only 8 products of a lineage too old and too dark to escape. Weeks passed. Appeals were filed and denied. The evidence was too strong. Their confessions too clear. Churches across the state argued over their fate, some pleading for mercy, others demanding retribution. Newspapers from New York to San Francisco ran headlines about the Appalachian twins and their ancient cult doctor Samuel Wheat. The anthropologist who had studied the case published a paper calling it a rare survival of pre-colonial spirituality. His words caused outrage, accused of romanticizing murder, but he defended himself, saying, to understand evil, one must first understand belief. Inside their cell, Ruth and Ruby wrote constantly pages of memories, teachings, songs their grandmother had sung beside firelight. These writings were later confiscated and sealed away, locked in county archives that would remain closed for decades. Their mother, Sarah, visited once. She wept the entire time, clutching her daughters through the iron bars. Witnesses said she whispered words no one could hear. She died 3 months later. Her death certificate said pneumonia. Locals said heartbreak. Their father left town and was never seen again. A week before the execution, Edmund Price came to see the twins. They greeted him kindly, as though they were meeting an old friend. He asked if they were afraid. Ruby smiled faintly. "There is no death, Mr. Price. Only returning." Ruth added, "The blood waits. Somewhere in these mountains, the next ones have already been born." Edmund left shaken to his soul. That night, Hargrove found an old journal mentioning a place called the First Sanctuary, the birthplace of the Guardian Pact, but no directions were given. And soon that secret, too, would die with them. On the eve of December 15th, a violent storm struck the mountains. Lightning clawed across the sky. Winds howled like the voices of the dead. The police station lost power, and lanterns cast trembling shadows on the walls. In Tershel, Ruth and Ruby sang softly, a song in no known language. Its melody was mournful and hypnotic. One guard swore he saw the walls fade, replaced by visions of mountains beneath a black sky. When morning came, the storm had passed. The air was sharp and clear. It was execution day. Crowds gathered before dawn, hundreds from every corner of McDowell County. Some came seeking justice, others answers. Many didn't even know why they came. At 9:45, the twins were led out wearing gray cotton dresses, their hair braided, their hands bound. They walked without resistance, heads high. The gallows stood tall in the winter light. 2 ropes swayed gently. Reverend Joshua Winters approached them. "Repent now," he urged, trembling. "Ask forgiveness, and God may yet have mercy." Ruby smiled. "We've prayed already, Reverend, just not to your God." He stepped back, whispering prayers as though to shield himself. At exactly 10 o'clock, Judge Blackwood read the verdict one final time, his voice grave and unsteady. Then he asked if the condemned had any last words. Ruth lifted her head toward the horizon. "The mountains are eternal," she said softly. Civilizations rise and vanish. Laws written by men crumble to dust. But the stones, remember. Ruby's voice followed, like an echo from another world. We bear no hatred, but removing the guardian's tears at the earth's foundation. You cannot take what was meant to remain. Then, together, they began to sing. The same song from the night before, a melody so ancient and sorrowful that it made grown men weep. Their harmony rose like wind through pine trees, haunting and pure. The executioner lowered the black hoods. The ropes tightened. At the judge's nod, the lever was pulled. 2 trapdoors creaked open, and silence fell deep, consuming silence. When it was over, the doctor declared both women dead, but some swore they still heard it faint singing carried from the mountains, a sound that refused to die. They were buried in unmarked graves, 2 wooden crosses fading in the rain. Wildflowers soon bloomed their species unseen in those parts before. No one claimed to have planted them. Sheriff Hargrove served 12 more years before retiring. He never spoke of the case again. Edmund said sometimes he'd see the sheriff hiking alone near Pinnacle Mountain, staring at the cave mouth, listening. The caves themselves grew silent, avoided by locals, whispered about in taverns. Some claimed travelers still vanished there. Others said new twins had been born under strange signs. Decades later, when the county unsealed the twins' writings, scholars found songs and prayers unlike any known language, fragments of a faith older than Christianity itself. The papers were stored again, locked away for academic safety. And still, the mountains stood. They keep their secrets well. On certain nights, when the wind turns and the forest holds its breath, some say they can still hear the faint echo of 2 voices singing, a melody that lingers not in the ear, but in the bones. The story of Ruth and Ruby remains an open wound in the history of West Virginia, a haunting reminder that beneath every civilization lies something ancient, waiting, patient. Justice was served, but whether peace was found, no one can say.